Noon or good evening or whatever it is for everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar for Total Quilter and My Decorative Quilter. As DJ mentioned, this is our 4-month quilting project, and this is the last project, and this is our full-size quilt. It was designed for you by Rita Guzzard and presented by myself, Mark Garetz. I'm a National R&K educator. So let's go ahead and get started. As I always like to do before I get into both the software and the construction details, I'd like to show you a picture of what the whole thing is going to look like, so as we go through the various steps you have some idea what we are headed towards. And DJ, I think your mic is still on.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to mute it or not. It's up to you. So anyway, this was the first set of things that we did. This is our 2 pillows that we did, 2 home deck pillows that were in a matching motif. And then we did a table runner, again in that same motif. A wall hanging was last month's project, and this month's project is the full-size quilt. You can see that's the same motif, and they all go together as a whole. And as you saw in the beginning, this is a picture of the finished actual quilt. And then next to it over here on the left is that diagram of the quilt again, so you can see. We're going to put these blocks together, and you can see the various fabric differences between each of the blocks to make that pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the software section. And we have 2 different methods of doing this particular project this month. One is for those of you that still have My Decorative Quilter 2, and the other is for those of you that have our new Total Quilter. And if you have My Decorative Quilter 2, you will want to refer to the software and construction details that are in the download that you got with this month's project. In our live webinar today, what we're going to be going over is the Total Quilter version of this project. So you'll want to go ahead and open up your software, in this case Total Quilter, and you can see I have it open here. And the first thing you'll want to do is come up to this icon up here in the left-hand corner, which is the Create a New Page icon, and click it. And when you do that, you will get a new page like this. And your grid may or may not look like this, but we're going to get our grids all looking the same here in a second. Before we do that, let's just talk about the various kinds of clicks that we're going to do today. So the first thing we're going to do is what's called a hover, which is where you just hold the mouse over something. Like if I just hold it over this ruler at the top here, that's called hovering, and we're not clicking on anything. Then there's 3 different types of clicks we're going to do today in today's software lesson. And the first type is a regular left click of the mouse, and I will either say just click, or I might say left click. Either one of those is the same. And then there's a right click, which is a click of the right mouse button. And lastly, there's a very special kind of click we call a control click, where you're going to be holding down the control key on your keyboard and clicking the left button on your mouse. So that's a control click. So the first thing you're going to want to do is come up and hover over the top ruler, and then you're going to right click on it. And this is where we're going to get our screens to all set up and look the same. So the first thing you want to make sure is that you're in inches mode. You'll want show grid checked. You'll want snap to grid checked. And in the written instructions, it will tell you you also need snap to guidelines checked. You actually do not need that for this particular project because we are not going to create any guidelines to snap to. So you can have this unchecked or checked, it doesn't matter. And you do need snap to anchors checked, however. And then lastly, you're going to want to come down here and click grid settings. And we're going to set up our grid to have a horizontal spacing of 3.375 inches and a vertical spacing of 5. Now most of the time we always have our grid set to squares, but for this whole series of 4 projects we've had it set to this rectangle. So depending on what you're doing, it doesn't necessarily need to be a square. You want to set it to whatever works for your project. And then over here in grid major, you want it 1 and 1. So our grid major lines are basically going to match our regular grid spacing. The rest of this you can leave alone, and then you're going to go ahead and click OK to lock those changes in. And now your screen should look something like this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down and select our thread chart, And the way we do that is down here in the lower left-hand corner with the Select Thread Chart icon. So go ahead and click that. And when you do that, you'll see a whole list of possible thread charts to choose from. For this project, we're going to come up here and choose Floriani Cotton. Now, the reason we're choosing that isn't because we actually want you to use that thread when you get to the stitching part of this design. In fact, we prefer you use our Quilter Select Perfect Cotton Plus and Para Cotton Poly threads, which we'll get to when we get to our construction details. But the reason that we're choosing this Floriani Cotton palette is it's a very limited palette of just 15 colors, so it makes it easy to find the color that we need so we don't have to scroll all around the bottom here. So once you've got your thread chart selected to Floriani Cotton, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to import a piece of artwork. Now, artwork is Floriani speak for a vector file, and we are going to go ahead and load that in, and that is going to serve as a guideline or template, if you will, so we can create our quilt block over the top of it. Now, we gave you the necessary file in the June Project 2017 folder for My Decorative Quilter or Total Quilter that you will have downloaded, and that's where it's going to be located. So the way you get it is you come up here to the File menu, and you come down here to Import Artwork. Now, this is after you've already downloaded and unzipped the files into the proper directory. They will show up in your June 2017 project folder. So let me click the down arrow here so I can show you exactly where they are. They're in C, Floriani, Designs, MDQ Project, June 2017. So that's where they are, and you'll see 3 different SVG files. The first one is Quilt Block FTQ, that's for Floriani Total Quilter. Then there's MDQ, which is for My Decorative Quilter. And then finally, just a generic version of it. So we're going to use the one for Total Quilter. So we're going to go ahead and click the top one, and then we're going to go ahead and open that. And it's going to bring in this quilt block. And what we're going to do now is we are going to slice this up to create our various pieces that we need for both cutting and stitching. And to do that the easy way, we are going to create an appliquilt block out of this. And the way we do that is we come up here to our icons that are the appliquilt icons, and they are the purple ones here. And the one we want is this one right here, Create Appliquilt Block. So we're going to go ahead and click that, and when we do, you'll see that 2 things happen. Number one is my cursor changes to a crosshair, and it's got a little rectangle by it. That rectangle by it is what's reminding us that the first step we need to do in creating this block is to draw or trace the outline or outside rectangle of our block. The other thing that you'll see that happened is these little blue squares appeared. Now, we call those anchors or nodes, and these are the anchors or nodes or points that define how the shapes of these lines are created. And because we have snap to anchors turned on when we set up our design window, that's why these showed up, because these are the anchors that we can snap to. So the software is conveniently showing us our anchors. Now, the first thing we're going to do to create this appliquilt block is we're going to trace our outline of the quilt block. Now, again, we have snap to anchors turned on. We also have snap to grid lines turned on. And you'll see that the grid lines divide this quilt into nice quadrants, and this block anyway into nice quadrants. And so I have anchor points also at the corner, so either one, as long as I get close to this area here and click and drag a box down to the lower right-hand corner, as long as I get it in the right area here, when I let off the mouse, it's going to snap and give me the perfect outline because of the way I have my snapping set up. So that's one of the cool things about the power of snapping. Now you'll notice the rectangle went away on my cursor, saying that now what I need to do is bisect up this quilt block into the various sections. Now, I do not have to actually draw each individual section. To get this to slice up, all I need to do is trace the lines, and the software, the appliquilt section, will automatically slice the block up for us. It's a really, really cool part of appliquilt. Makes it super easy to create these blocks, even when they have these curved and complex shapes. So when we do this, there's going to be two different kinds of clicks that we do. We're going to be clicking where these anchor points are, and again, because I have snapped anchors turned on, I don't have to be super precise and get right on top of them. As long as I get close, it'll snap to that anchor point. But there's two kinds of clicks, like I said. One is going to be a regular left click, and that is how we put in a straight line point. And if we control click, we will put in a curved point. So for example, this first one we're going to do first here, this is all curves, and so we are going to control click all along here to put these points in. Now some of these shapes have sharp points here, which are not actually curved, and the way we tell the software to put those in, at least one of the shortcut ways to do it, is to control click or curved point all the way up, and finally curved point on the sharp point. And then if we follow that with a regular left click, it tells the software that the previous point was supposed to be sharp. So if we were coming down here, we would control click along here all the way to here, and then on this point we would left click to tell it this one was sharp. This is also a sharp one, so this one would also be a left click, and we'd continue on. So you'll see this as we do it. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard. I apologize you can't see me doing this, but I'm holding down Control as I click these various points along this curve. So I'm control clicking all around here. Now when I get to the end, I press the Enter key on my keyboard to tell it that I have finished that line. So I finished that line there. We're going to come over and do this one now. So again, I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to click along all of these points here. And here's a sharp point, so I've controlled click here. What I'm going to do now is regular left click here. Again, another sharp point, so a regular left click. And then I'm going to continue on with my control clicks all the way down. Now we're going to drop down here and do this one. So we're going to do Control. Oops, I'm sorry. I need to backspace up one point. You see what happened here? It put a curve in, and I didn't tell it I was done with that line. So I'm going to backspace by hitting the backspace key. So that's going to take out that last point, and I'm going to backspace one more, and then I'm going to control click here again, and I'm going to correct my error by pressing Enter. So you saw what I did there. I accidentally went on down here without telling it I was done with this line. So I backspaced a couple to get back to this point. I put my two last points in again, and then I remembered to press Enter. So hopefully I won't mess that up again. I'm going to come down here and control all the way around down to this sharp point. Again, clicking on all these. Now I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to control click to the end and remember to press Enter. Now I'm going to come down and do this little quarter moon here, and so these are all curves, so these are all going to get control points, control clicks rather. So I'm control clicking all the way around there, press Enter to tell it I'm done. Now we're going to jump over to here, and we're going to go up around here and then come down here. So what I'm going to do is control click here all the way up around, and you can see that it's automatically curving that line for me to fit. And now I'm going to left click again, then control click, and now I need to left click because that was a sharp point, and I'm just going to continue on with my curved points, and then a sharp point, and then control clicks all the way up to the end, and then I'm going to press Enter, and one more to do. These are all control clicks, so I'm going to start here with my control held down on my keyboard and just click all the way around this semicircle. And I'm at the last point, and I'm going to press Enter to tell it I'm done. And when I'm done bisecting up the entire block, then to tell it I'm done, I simply right click, and it's going to calculate for a bit, and you'll see that it will slice that block up into nice sections. And now we're ready to start decorating our quilt block, and we are ready to start assigning fabric colors and stitches and things to it. Now the way we do that when we're using an AppliQuilt block is we use a very special select mode called our AppliQuilt block selector. So this is our normal selection tool over here, but we actually want this one here, which is our AppliQuilt object selection. This allows us to select either an area, so that would be the piece of the block or the line that bisects the block. So what we're going to do first is select that tool and come and select this semicircle here. We're going to select the area, not the line. So we want to be in the area, and we're going to click to select it. Now what we want to do is we want to put a decorative stitch in here. The way we're going to do that is come down to our one clicks down here, and we're going to use an advanced stippling stitch as our decorative stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and click on advanced stippling, and that's going to bring up this cool dialog, which is going to give us a bunch of advanced stippling patterns to choose from. And to keep our motif the same as we've been doing, we're going to choose stipple number 10, and it's going to put it in as a very tight stitch, but what we want is a much more open stitch. So we're going to come over here to our properties box. We're going to change our pattern size to 15.9. So I've selected the 3 that was there by default. I'm going to type in 15.9, leave the stitch length at 2.5, and go ahead and click apply. And you can see now I've got a nice bigger decorative pattern in there. The next thing we need to do is assign our motif or binding stitches to these stitch lines, and these are going to serve to tack our applique fabric down to our base fabric when we construct our block. So we're going to stay in AppliQuilt object selection mode here, and we're going to click on this first line up here. Then I'm going to hold down Control, continue to click all the other lines, because I'm going to apply the same stitch to all of them. So if I Control click or multi-select all of them, then I can just do it with one step rather than having to do each one individually. Now, if I wanted a different stitch for each line, I could do them individually, but it's not what we're going to do for this. So I'm going to, as I say, select the first one, then I'm going to hold down Control and select the second one, third one, don't forget about this one over here, and then this one here, and lastly this one down here. And then I'm going to come down to my one-click motif runs to put my binding stitch in. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. It's going to put in the default of pattern 205, but it's not what we want for this. What we're going to do is click the down arrow here to select a different pattern, and the pattern we want is 247, which is right here, and the default pattern size for that is 15, but we are going to change it to 6. We're going to change it to 6. We're going to go ahead and click apply, and it's going to put our decorative stitches in here nice for us. All right, so the very next thing we need to do is we need to now assign some fabric colors to the different parts of this quilt block, so that when we go to generate cut files and we cut the various pieces, it knows what piece goes where and not to cut them all at the same time. So we are going to start out by selecting this half moon here. So again, you want to be in AppliQuilt object selection mode, and I'm going to come here and simply click somewhere in the middle of it to select that area, and then I'm going to skip over this piece, and I'm going to come and select this V-shaped piece here, and I'm going to do that while holding down Control. So I've got these two areas selected now, and then I'm going to lastly do the quarter moons in the corners here. So I'm going to select those. So now I've got all of those pieces so I can assign the fabric to them all at once. And what I'm going to use is this one right here, the number 1 in our design colors. So if I click on that, it's going to give me an option. Do I want it to be the fabric color, the fill paths color, which are the stitches along those lines, or do I just want to remove the color? I don't want to remove it. I do want to assign it to a fabric color. So if I click fabric color, it is going to put that fabric color in here, which is going to tell the software that these cut pieces all are cut separately from these pieces if we were doing a regular AppliQuilt block. But what we're going to do instead is an applique block, so it's going to do something a little bit different, and I'll explain that when we get there, which is actually pretty soon, actually right now. What we're going to do is go ahead and click on the last item in our sequence view, which is right here, to select our AppliQuilt block. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to export this. Now we've got 3 different ways we could export this from AppliQuilt. The first one is our normal export AppliQuilt block. And what this does is it exports each individual piece as a separate cut file being that each piece is cut out separately with either applique wonder or applistick material on the back of it, then they're all stuck down to a base piece of stabilizer to form our quilt top. So that uses a separate cut piece for each piece. The other way we could do it would be exported as a faux piecing block, and that would have made us put different stitch patterns in each of these blocks. Instead of exporting them as cut pieces of fabric, we would instead get them as various fill patterns to simulate piecing without actually doing any piecing, hence the name faux piecing. But what we're going to actually do is this last mode here, which is an applique block. Now this is very similar to an applique quilt block with one significant difference, and that is when we export an applique block, it's going to allow us to pick one of these fabric colors as a base piece of fabric, which we would then put the remaining pieces down on top of as a more traditional applique. So it uses a base piece of fabric that's big, like for example this big beige piece of fabric if we chose beige, and then these other pieces would go down on top of it, right? So that's what we're going to do. So let's see what that looks like. If I click Export Applique Block, it's going to bring up my Export Settings dialog. And the first thing we're going to do is in here in our project name, we want to overtype design 1 with quilt block. So I'm going to go ahead and type in quilt block there. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the default folder, which is C. Floriani Designs Appliquilt. Then it's going to create a new folder called Quilt Block and put all of the pieces and parts that we need to create this quilt block in this quilt block folder under C. Floriani Designs Appliquilt. I'm going to leave my seam allowance at 1/4 inch. If you need to, you can change it to something else. We are going to definitely want to generate stitch files. So you want to have stitch files checked. And here, this is important, you want to change your file format to whatever type of machine that you have to embroider this with. Now it's coming up by default at the Baby Lock Brother Multi-Needle PES version 9, which happens to be what I have, so I'm going to leave it there. But if you needed to change to something else, you could click this down arrow and choose from any of the other many different machine formats that we offer you. But you're going to choose the one that obviously uses the format for the machine you want to stitch this out on. You can optionally have Save WAF File checked. I like to always leave that checked. But important for this project, we want to click As Digitized. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually generate the stitches, the decorative stitches, in the order that we actually digitized them, the way we sliced up that block, as opposed to having the software make its own decisions about it. So we went in a very specific sequence, and I wanted to keep that, so I'm going to check As Digitized. This next section here, if you have a digital cutter, you're going to want to click Cut Files, and here under File Format, you're going to want to change to the file format that you need. Now the default is SVG, and all cutters can use SVG format, but if you have a Brother Scan and Cut, you can click the down arrow and change to the FCM format, which is specific to the Brother Scan and Cut. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on SVG. I'll go ahead and leave my mat size at 12 by 12. Now this is important right here. This is the background fabric. This again is what makes this different from a regular applique quilt block, is being able to choose this background fabric. So it's chosen the beige automatically, which is what we want, and it's what makes the most sense for this block. If I slide this dialog out of the way, most of the area, at least the background area, is the beige, so that makes the most sense to put these other pieces down on, and that's really the only way it's going to work for this design the way we've designed it. So you want to make sure that it's this beige color. If it's not, or when you're doing your own project later and you want to choose a different color, all you do is click that little box, and it'll show you all the fabrics that are used in that particular quilt block and allow you to choose the one you want as the background. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that beige and click OK. And again, you can save the WAF file for your cut files if you want. And if you click Import Files, which I'm not going to do today, what this does is it takes all of these vector files that it creates for the cutting and opens them up right away in either in Total Quilter. So you can manipulate them further if you want to, like if you want to combine them onto a single page or whatever you want to do. We're not going to need to do that today. You can click here to get a picture of it. We're not going to worry about that today. But here in the print options, you've got two things you could do. You could click preview, and this is going to show you a preview of what this project is going to look like. So here's a nice picture of what the final block is going to look like. If I click next, you can see here's my stitching sequence and my colors. If I click next, here's that background fabric piece. Now you'll notice this is not full size. This is just showing me an idea of what it's going to look like. And then the next one is going to show me my 3 pieces that I need to cut out for this quilt. And again, these are not full size because we didn't check full size. So I'm going to close this and I'll show you what happens if we click here for manual cutting. If I do that and I preview, it's going to show me that same picture, but now what I'm going to have in my same stitch view, but here I've got half of that background block, and here's the other half because it's too big to fit on a piece of paper. And then my next one is showing me half of that V-shaped block and then the other half of it. So for both of those, I'd have to print these out, cut them right along the line, and then tape them together to make a full-size cutting template. And then the next one is that last piece, and the next one is that other last piece. And so I would use these if I wanted a paper template of a full-size cutting template. I'm going ahead and close that. Now you can do that if you want for this, but you don't need to because we've actually given you some pre-designed cutting templates if you want to cut these by hand. So the last thing you want to do is click export, and when you do that, it's going to save the files, and you can see here it has put them into this C. Floriani Designs Appliquilt Quilt Block folder, and you can see here are the designs. So here's all my cut files, here's my stitches file, and here's the actual block, right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this because the next thing we need to do in the software is we want to manipulate the stitch files of this block to be a little bit different than the default to do a couple of things for us, and we'll explain that when we get there. So the first thing we need to do to start that process is we need to open up that stitch file that I generated. So what we're going to do that is come here to our Open dialog. I'm going to go ahead and click that icon, and I've got it set to come right here because I've been practicing this, so it's automatically going to come right here. Otherwise, it will go to the last place you were. But let me show you where it is just another time. It's under C. Floriani Designs Appliquilt Quilt Block, or whatever you named it. And what you want in this quilt block stitches dot whatever machine format. Now we use the PES, so that's what I'm going to click, and I'm going to go ahead and click open, and it's going to bring that file in as a brand new stitch file. So I've just gone ahead and opened up that stitch file in a new design window in the Total Quilter software. Now one of the things that happens sometimes is that the grid that I've got here by default, it's not actually the correct size. It didn't actually line up with that quilt block very well. So to fix that, all you need to do is right-click on the ruler bar, go to your grid settings, and then just simply click OK. You don't need to change anything. And when you do that, it's going to snap that grid into the right position. So you can see now it's all lined up with our quilt block. So the first thing we need to do is adjust some of our stitches over here to do exactly what we want. So this first set of stitches out here, the very first item in our sequence view, I'll go ahead and click it so it'll highlight it out there in the design view. So this is actually showing the outside of where our 1/4 inch seam allowance was, so we could use this to trim our block up. We're actually not going to do that. We've got some other stitches that are going to come along later to help us do that. So we don't actually need this set of stitches, so we're going to actually delete those. And I'm going to do that by clicking the cut icon right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that cut icon, which will delete it. The next thing we want to do is manipulate these run stitches, or this run stitch here at the very end. So this is the outline that shows us the edges of the block, and this is particularly useful for when we seam the various blocks together. So it shows us where to line the blocks up. We want to also use that for some other things like the tack down for our batting and the placement line for our batting. So to do that, we're going to reuse this, and we also want it to stitch out first. So we need to move this to the top, but before we do that, we need 3 copies of this. Right now there's only 1 line of stitching here, and we need 3. So to get 3, I'm going to select it. I'm going to come up here and copy it. Then I'm going to paste it twice. So I'm going to click paste twice. And as you can see here, now I've got 3 copies of it. And like I said before, we want all these 3 to be up here at the top. So I could click this and drag it up here to the top. I'm going to show you another cool way to do it, though. That's the way it shows you in the instructions. But I'm going to show you another cool way to do it, and that is by right-clicking on it. And when you do that, you're going to get this whole big menu, but one of these is the Move menu. When you hover over Move, you're going to get some options. The one we want is the very first one called First. So if I click that, it's automatically going to move it to the first stitching position, and there it is in the right place for us. Now this first run is going to be our placement line. The second one's going to be our tack down for the batting, and the third one is going to be our outline. So we need to manipulate these a little bit more to do what we want. First of all, we want the machine to stop between this run and this run, so we know where to put our batting down, and we can actually get in there and put it down. And we don't want this to be a straight run. We want the second one to be more of a tack down stitch. So what I'm going to do is select it, and first we're going to make the machine stop by assigning it a different thread color. So we're going to use this wine color down here. So you want to come down here to this Floriani Cotton Wine and click it, and it's automatically going to make it a new thread color. And so we're going to get gray, wine, gray. So the machine's going to run, stop, run this color, and stop, and then pick up and do this one, which is what we want. And like I said before, we want to change this one from a standard run into something we can use as a tack down. So what we're going to do is come up here to our properties and change the run type from single run by clicking the drop down, go to our Appliquilt binding motif stitches, and we're then from the motif menu going to choose the very first one. That's a binding stitch called AQ00, and this is the default, and it's going to be that cross stitch pattern again. But here we have both a stitch length, which defines the size of the pattern, and also run spacing. Now normally we leave the run spacing at 0. What this does though is it puts in extra spacing between each set of stitches. So we're going to actually spread these out by changing our run spacing to 4, and that'll make it so it's not so tight, because we really don't need it to be that tight, and it'll reduce the number of stitches and make it run faster. So we're going to go ahead and click apply, and now you can see I've got that pattern in here, and you can see it's spread out more than it would be normally, and that's going to be perfect for a tack down for our batting. The next thing we need to do is we need to fix a little problem here. Because we moved this gunmetal gray from the bottom up to the top, we've got 2 gunmetal gray sets of stitches here in a row. We have this one, which is our outside run, and then this one, which is our skeleton, to show us where the placement lines are for the fabric, and also going to tack down our fabric. And so they could be the same color, but the machine's going to stop between here and here because of the way we move these around. And what we want to do is eliminate the stop between here and here. There's a couple different ways we could do that, but I'm going to show you one way you can do it. When they're adjacent like this, you can select the first one, hold down Control and select the second one, and then what we're going to do to make this all run contiguously is we are going to just reassign it to the same color. So that's color number 1 in our sequence view here. So I'm going to come over and hover over that and click it. And when I do that, it's going to put them together as one object without a stop between them. So that's a shortcut way that you can get rid of the stop between the 2 colors and keep the machine from stopping. And then the very last thing we need to do, or the next to last thing we need to do, is we need to fix a little problem that we have here. It's a little hard to see like this, so I'm going to get my magnifying glass and click it, and I'm going to drag a box around this semicircle here to zoom into the decorative stitching. Now, if you do that at home so you can adjust this, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. Just don't forget when you're done to come back up here and click the normal select tool. Because if you look close in here, you can see that this center line of this pattern is not exactly on the center line of our quilt. Now, if this was just one block we were doing, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But we're actually going to take a second block, and it's going to get stitched over in here, flipped over. So if we put another one flipped over next to it, this offset is going to show up. These patterns are not going to be aligned, and this center line here is not going to line up with the center line over here. So we're actually going to grab these stitches, and we're going to move them down to the center line. So you want to select them, and you want to make sure that your cursor looks like a hand. Then you're actually going to click and drag it down a little bit, and you'll see that in the middle there I've got green, and that green is telling me that I'm right on that purple center line. When I let off, you can see now that I'm perfectly aligned here. So my decorative stitches are now aligned to the center of my quilt. I've got one last thing I need to do before this block is complete, and that is I need to add the quilting stitches in. And we've already created those quilting stitches, so there's no need to recreate them each time. So we're simply going to load them in from a prior month's project. The way we load in another set of stitch files into this set of stitch files is what we call a stitch file merge. And we get there from File, Merge Stitch File, which is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now we need to find the place where we created that. And where that is in the first project that we did. So that would be in March 2017. So I'm going to click the down arrow, and I'm going to go to the appliquilt level. So I'm basically going to go up one level, and that was our pillow project. So I'm going to double click that, and here's the file right here, linearquilting.waf. So that's the one you want. So I'm going to click that and click open, and that's going to bring that in. Now it tries to put it in a place where it's not on top of this, but we actually do want it to be exactly on top of this, in fact centered on it. So we need to do that. So to do that, we're going to use a trick. We're going to click and select this, and you'll notice that my quilt block by default is always going to come in centered to my ruler. So here's 0 on the horizontal, 0 on the vertical. You can see my quilt block is perfectly centered. We can use a trick to tell this set of stitches to also be centered at the ruler centers by going up to our alignment icon here. If we click it, the only thing that's lit up is this one here, center to rulers, because it's the only alignment function we can do when we just have one object selected. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and you'll see it'll snap over here and be perfectly aligned to the rest of our quilt block. I'm going to double click the magnifying glass, which again is a really handy shortcut for zoom to fit, so you can see this quilt block. And all I need to do now is save this. It's already quiltblock.stitches.pes. I can go ahead and click save, but it's going to try and put it in that pillow project folder, which is where we had it before. And what I'm going to do is go up a level and go back to my quilt block project folder, which is where I've been working. I'll double click it, and I'm going to save it not as a WAF file, although you certainly can. I just care about this stitch file, so I'm going to click the down arrow, go back to my multi-needle PES version 9 format. You can see here's the file I started with. I can select it and click save. Since it's the same file name, it's going to ask me if I want to replace it, and I really do want to replace it because I don't care about the one that I didn't modify. And I'm going to go ahead and click yes, save it over the top, and now my quilt block is done. All that remains for you to do is take that stitch file, put it on a stick, and take it over to your machine, or however you get it into your machine to stitch it out. So that completes the software section. So we are going to go back to our PowerPoint, which should be already loaded. There it is. And again, this is what the finished quilt is going to look like. And let's go ahead and get started with the construction details. First thing we're going to do is go over our materials that we require for this block and actually for the whole project. So you're going to need some Floriani embroidery batting. You're going to need Floriani nylon no-show mesh stabilizer, you're going to need Floriani Applique Wonder or Quilter Select Applistick tape and roll or sheet of this. So you're going to need it again in the roll or sheet form and the 1/4" tape. They both come in roll or sheet and both also come in tape. It does not matter which one you use. In fact, you could mix and match them if you need to. And you'll also need some Quilter Select Perfect Cotton Plus. That's our 60 weight thread in the Quilter Select line for the top thread. And you'll also want some Quilter Select Para Cotton Poly for your bobbin thread. And you'll want to choose colors in those threads that work well with your fabric choices. And lastly, you're going to need Wet and Gone tacky tape, 1" width. And this is actually an optional item, but I think it's a really, really handy. So you're going to want some of that to complete this. And you're going to need a 7.5 by 10" or 185 by 260 millimeter or larger hoop size. If you don't have a hoop that goes that big, you can reduce the designs, but both the projects and the fabric requirements will actually end up being smaller if you do that. And lastly, you'll want to have a walking foot and a joining or stitch in the ditch foot for your stitching. And then for fabric, you're going to want some light colored fabric, 5.5 yards of that, 2.5 yards of medium colored fabric, 3 3/4 yards of dark colored fabric. For our binding fabric, we're going to need 2.5 yards, and the backing fabric, you'll need 5.5 yards. Now, fabric quantities we've just talked about, these are for all 4 projects, not just this one. So all 4 projects can be done with this much. But the fabric yardage that we've given you here is pretty generous to account for the different ways that you might cut these blocks up. And then lastly, for the complete details on the fabric requirements, you'll want to see the project overview, which you would have downloaded in the February 2017 project folder. Now, for the fabric for this particular block, again, we are going to refer now to the second page of that same overview section. Again, you would have downloaded that in the February 2017 project folder. You'll want to cut the fabric shapes together along with Applique Wonder or that Applistick material that's fused on the back according to the quilt column in that overview. So there's 4 columns there, 1 for each month, and you're going to use the last one. You'll want to use either a digital cutter or, like I said, the templates that we provided you in this month's project files if you're cutting these by hand. But just a side note, we're going to end up making 50 blocks in this particular project. So probably by about the end of the 3rd block, if you're cutting them by hand, you're probably going to be asking yourself whether or not you ought to get one of those digital cutters. Because if you do, it's going to make this project go a whole heck of a lot faster. And there's just a whole lot more you can do with a digital cutter once you get one. But anyway, from the light fabric, in addition to the fabric shapes that you're going to cut out from the software along that are detailed in this overview section, in addition to those quilt block shapes, you're also going to, from the light fabric, cut 10 11" by width of fabric strips for the background. Now, this is the background for the quilt block, not the backing fabric. Then you're going to cut each one of those strips into 5 8 by 11" sections. Then you're going to cut 6 to 7 1.5" strips and sew them end to end. Then you're going to cut 2 of those into 1.5 by 52" strips, and those are going to be for the top and the bottom. And then you're going to cut 2 more into 1.5" by 70" strips for the sides of the quilt. And from the dark fabric, you're going to cut 7 3 1/4" by width of fabric strips, and again sew those end to end. And from that, you're going to cut 2 3 1/4" by 54" strips and 2 3 1/4" by 72" strips. And then from the batting, you're going to want to cut 50 6 3/4" by 10" sections, and you want to cut these nice and precisely. And then lastly, you're going to want to cut 2 2" by 51" and 2 2" by 73" strips. Now, if you bought your Floriani batting in the 1 yard package, that's 1 yard by 60 inches wide. So you aren't going to have a 73" strip to cut. So if it's necessary, you'll want to attach the strips together to make a 73" length using a piece of Wet and Gone tacky tape. So just butt the strips up together and then tape them with a piece of wet and gone tacky tape. You don't need to seam them together. You can just go ahead and use the tape to hold them together while you construct the quilt. So that's one of the reasons I like wet and gone tacky, and you'll get another use for it a little bit later on. And then lastly, you're going to want to cut 50 sections of no-show mesh about 2 inches larger than your hoop size. Now, before we embroider, it's important to note that most of the color changes in this design are there simply to make the machine stop between the steps. You can leave the same thread in even though it stops, or if you want to, you can change it. That's totally up to you depending on the top thread effect you want to achieve. However, if you have a multi-needle machine, it's important to use the controls built into that machine to insert what they call stop commands to make the machine stop between the colors. That's so you can get in there and put your fabric and your batting and other things down, just like you're doing appliques. If you don't do these stops, the machine's just going to pick up the next color and continue stitching on, and it won't work right. So let's get into the embroidery. First thing you want to do is load that quilt block design into your machine, hoop up a piece of Floriani nylon no-show mesh, attach the hoop to the machine, and stitch out the first color, which will become the placement line for the batting. Next, you want to center that piece of batting within the placement lines, and gently holding it along one edge when you start the stitching, stitch the next color to tack down the batting. Next, what you'll want to do is center the background fabric right side up over the batting and stitch the next color, which will be the placement lines for the various fabric shapes that also serve to tack down the batting and the fabric. And then you'll want to change the upper thread if you want for the decorative stitching and go ahead and stitch out that color. And then you'll want to peel the backing paper off of the shapes and carefully place those shapes down within the placement lines and lightly press them to secure them to the fabric so they don't move. And then you'll want to again change the upper thread if you want to and stitch the next color for the binding or cover stitches as you see in red here. And then you'll want to change it again one more time if you want to stitch the quilting stitches that go across like you see here. So that actually completes the stitching of one of the blocks, but what we're going to do is repeat this procedure 49 more times to make a total of 50 sections. You want to make the number and style of the blocks as shown here. So you're going to make 20 that look like this with the dark fabric on the outside pieces and the medium fabric on the inside. You'll make 12 of them that are reversed from that. You'll make 6 that are all the dark color fabric. You'll make 6 with the dark on the bottom and the medium on the top, and 6 with the dark on the top and the medium on the bottom. Again, don't forget that this beige fabric is going to be a piece of beige fabric that's on the bottom, so you don't need to cut or worry about that because that'll come out right. Then the next thing you need to do, once you've got all those blocks done, is take them out of the hoop, obviously, turn them upside down, and from the back side, you'll want to trim each block a 1/4 inch outside each seam line. Get them all nice and squared up. Then you'll want to lay out your blocks as shown here into these rows. All right, and I've got a typo here, 2 rows. It should be 5 rows. I apologize for that. So you should have row 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you'll want to follow the sequence of the colors as the blocks that you made so they're all laid out nice like this. Then you want to pick up A and B in row 1, put them right sides together with this edge aligned, and then along that edge right there, you'll want to sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press them open. Then you'll want to sew block C to A and B like you just did, and that's kind of what we're showing here in the big picture. Then you want to keep repeating that, sewing and adding each block on to complete a row. And you'll want to continue to repeat that with the other rows. So then you'll want to sew row 2 together, 3, 4, and 5. And then what you want to do is take row 1 and row 2, put them right sides together, and seam along this edge in here to sew row 1 to row 2. Next, you'll want to sew row 4 to row 5, finally tack row 3 onto the 1, 2 section, and then lastly sew the row 1, 2, 3 onto the 4, 5 section, and that will complete your quilt body. And then, if necessary, you want to trim it to square up the quilt body. Now, for the next set of slides, it's a little difficult to show you how to attach the border and the mock binding technique with a full-size quilt and maintain any of the detail in the corners. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to use a 10-inch block, but the technique is identical. So we're going to be showing it to you with a little piece of it, but you're going to want to do this with obviously the whole quilt. So what you want to do is start out by butting the 2-inch batting strip, that'll be the short batting strip, against the top side. And then again, with the wet and gone tacky tape, it's really useful to just, once they're butted together, tape them together. Then you'll want to flip it upside down and attach the two with a joining stitch, and then repeat that for the bottom side. Trim the ends off flush, and then repeat the same technique on the side longer pieces. Next, what you'll want to do is you'll want to place, and we're looking at the front side of the quilt here, you'll want to place the shorter light fabric strip right side down along the top edge of the quilt. So its edge of the fabric is going to be right up against where you've butted the batting up against the quilt. Then you're going to sew that in from that edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along, and then you're going to repeat that for the bottom side and press those two strips open. You're going to place the longer light fabric strip right side down along the long edge of the quilt, sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, repeat for the opposite side, and press that open. So when you're done, it'll look something like this. But then on all 4 sides, you want to draw a line on the side strips 3/4 of an inch away from the seam line. So this is going to be towards the outside of the quilt. The rightmost red arrow, though, is showing you the seam line, and then the left arrow is showing you the actual line that you're going to draw. This is going to become a placement line for the next fabric strips. So you want to place that shorter dark fabric strip right side down along the top edge of the drawn line, sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and repeat that for the bottom side and press them both open. Now you'll want to repeat that for the sides, again aligning to the lines that you've drawn, sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, do that on both sides and press both of them open. When you've got both of that done, the next thing to do is piece together your backing fabric if necessary, and then trim to 58 inches by 76 inches. Now I like to place the backing right side down on a nice flat surface like my cutting table, and then center the quilt on the backing right side up, and then pin the 2 pieces together as desired. Now in the instructions, it's reversed. Rita will have you put the quilt right side down and then put the backing centered over the top. I find it easier to do this way so I can see the quilt being centered a little easier, but that is up to you. And then what you want to do is get the whole thing so that you're looking at the right side, and you want to stitch in the ditch around each block to secure the backing to the quilt. Now it says to go around each block, but really what you're going to do is go across along the seam lines between the rows of the strip and across, rather than making a square around each block. And then it's important to also note that you do not want to stitch in the border or side strip area. You want to stop right at the edge of the quilt. Next, what you'll want to do is fold the side strips in towards the center to move them out of the way, and you'll want to trim the batting and backing fabric 1.5 inches away from the seam line on both sides, like is shown here in the arrow in the left diagram. And when you're done, you should have something that looks like the right diagram. Then we're going to repeat that for the top and the bottom, folding in the sides, trimming 1.5 inches away, and you'll have something that looks again like the right diagram there. Lastly, what you want to do is open out all the borders and press them open, and then you're going to flip the quilt upside down to have it look something like the second diagram there. And then what we're going to do now is create our mock miter binding. We're going to fold the top strip down in towards the edge of the quilt. So we're going to fold it in so that its edge meets the edge of the quilt. And then we're going to press that. And the next thing we're going to do is fold it over one more time and press it again. This time it's going to come over the backing. So first fold was right up to the edge of the backing. Second fold, fold it over and on to the back. Press it nice and well, then open it out, And then either on the quilt part or the binding part, doesn't matter, you want to press some 1/4 inch applique wonder tape to the underside of that border. And this is what we're going to use to secure that border down until we stitch it. It's important, though, that the tape should not extend past the seam lines, showing you the red arrows there in that second diagram. And then what you want to do is remove the release paper and then fold them back over and finger press them in place and repeat the same procedure on the bottom side. For these next pictures, we're going to show you a blow up of what's in the red rectangle area here. So we're going to show you one corner. You're going to repeat this for all 4 of these corners. So you want to rotate the quilt 90 degrees so it's oriented like we show you here. And then what you want to do is you want to trim away the excess fabric as shown to reduce the bulk in this corner. So what you're going to do is trim out a little rectangle here, and what you want to do is leave about a 1/16 of an inch right in here, and this area right here wants to be about a 1/4 of an inch. So about a 1/4 inch fold will remain. You'll want to repeat that for the other edge, which will be way up here, then repeat the procedure for the other side, which will be way out over here. Once you've got that done, what you're going to do is you're going to fold in the other side of piece of fabric, the other one, not the one you trimmed. You're going to fold that in at a 45-degree angle like this, leaving about an 1/8 inch gap between the edge of the quilt and this edge of the fabric right here. Then what you want to do is press this line down here. You want to press this so it's nice and even and pressed. And you want to repeat this procedure for all 4 of the corners. Next, what you'll want to do is fold this piece up, leaving about an 1/8 inch gap between here and here. So between the edge of the quilt and the edge of the fabric, about an 1/8 of an inch. Repeat it for the opposite side. Then you're going to take this whole edge and fold it up over onto the top of the quilt, actually the back of the quilt, to create this mock miter here. So it's called a mock miter because this side isn't actually mitered. It's only this top piece that creates the illusion of the miter here. And it's important to note that you're only going to do this with the long side strips and not the other side. So just this one side gets folded over like this. Press it. Once it's all nice and pressed and even to your liking, fold it back open a little bit. Put that 1/4 inch applique wonder tape in under this whole side here. Peel off the backing and secure it like we did before. All you need to do now is flip the quilt over to the front and stitch in the ditch between the quilt and light borders, and then stitch in the ditch again between the light and the dark border pieces, and your quilt will be done. So we want to thank everybody for attending. We hope you'll use this video along with the printed PDF instructions to recreate this project at home, and we hope you'll come back next month for our next exciting project. Just a quick note, next month's project will not be a live webinar. It will be pre-recorded. I want to double check with DJ to make sure that's right, but I think that's our schedule. Is that right, DJ?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. All right. And so it'll be pre-recorded, so it'll be available about the 1st of July for you to go ahead and download both the project and the watch the pre-recorded webinar. So with that, I'm going to say thanks again for attending. I'm going to turn it back over to DJ, who's going to show us the winners of last quilt project that we did.
Okay, can you see my screen, Mark?
No. Do I need to give control? There we go. Now I see.
Okay. All righty. So thank you, Mark, for another wonderful webinar going over the project by Rita. And we hope that you enjoyed that. And now we're ready to show you the winning quilts from our 12-month block of the month quilt project that we did. And the winner, if you haven't seen yet, is, I got to get my thing, first place to Phyllis Thomas. She did a wonderful job, very colorful. We really liked there was a panel that, you know, we kind of went and asked to kind of judge them all, and everyone was very impressed by the fabric and color choices for the first place winner, Phyllis. So thank you, and you did a wonderful job. And our second place.
Wait, before you go on, DJ,
yep.
Go back.
Okay.
Right, there we go. She did something a little bit unique in the borders that we didn't actually have in the real project. So she took it on herself to make those quilted borders look even cooler.
Yes, she did. She did.
All right.
So she did a wonderful job. Thanks for pointing that out as well. Second place went to Cheryl Augustine. So we really liked her for her choices of fabric and the layout. Did a wonderful job. Thank you, Cheryl. And the third place went to Stacy Romig. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. If I didn't, I do apologize. So the third place goes to Stacy. And thank you, everybody, for your participation in making the quilt. We wish we could have chosen more winners. We had a bunch of great entries, and thank you all for participating in that. And we look forward to doing another one sometime. I don't know exactly when. We're going to do another 12-month project. But with that said, though, we would love to see what you make with the quilt project that was just presented to you. The choice, the fabric choices and stitch, the thread used always makes each quilt look totally different. So if you do create that a quilt using the project that Mark just presented, please make sure you share that with us on Facebook. We would love to see it. I have one of the quilts, I have the pillow, the runner, all sitting here in my office right now that I'm looking at that was done by Rita, and it is a beautiful quilt. And we would love to see what you come up with using the fabric choices that you choose. Mark, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Nope, I just wanted to say the same thing, that obviously choosing different fabrics makes these, and threads, make this quilt look entirely different, even though it was all the same quilt design. So it's really amazing.
Yes, and again, thank you, Mark. And please do share anything that you create inside of Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter 2. We love to see them on Facebook. And so thank you again for your participation, and we'll see you next time. And until then, we'll see you later.